Repeating that breaking news this hour, the jurors in Erin Patterson's triple murder trial have told the Victorian Supreme Court they have reached a verdict. Ms Patterson, 50, has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges of murder and 1 of attempted murder over a beef Wellington lunch served to 4 relatives in 2023. Ms Patterson's parents-in-law, Don and Gail Patterson, both died after the Leongatha lunch, along with Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, survived after spending weeks in hospital. The jury has been deliberating in the regional Victorian town of Morwell, where the trial is taking place. A hearing is expected to occur at around 2:15 p.m, that is Eastern Time, where the jury is expected to deliver its verdict. In just a few minutes, we'll be bringing that live from Morwell, where we do have our reporters standing by. For those of you just joining us, jurors in the triple murder trial of Erin Patterson have reached a verdict. More than 50 witnesses have given evidence over 9 weeks of proceedings at the Latrobe Valley Law Courts in the Victorian town of Morwell. Now, as we wait to learn the outcome of one of the most keenly followed trials of the decade, let's take a look at how events have unfolded. Ms Patterson was on trial, charged with murdering 3 relatives and attempting to murder a 4th by serving them a beef Wellington lunch deliberately laced with extremely poisonous death cap mushrooms. The victims were all directly related to Ms Patterson's estranged husband, Simon Patterson. His parents, Gail and Don, both died, along with Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, survived after spending weeks being treated in hospital. Patterson had always maintained her innocence, claiming the mushrooms were mistakenly included in the meal. The beef Wellington, an expensive and complex dish to prepare, was the main course served at a lunch she hosted in July 2023 at her home in Leongatha, southeast of Melbourne. She had also invited her estranged husband Simon, but he declined to attend. The prosecution did not present a specific motive, but argued the defendant had felt growing anger and resentment towards the Pattersons. The court heard in late 2022 she and Simon had been arguing about money. The prosecution pointed to Facebook messages in which she criticised her extended family about its reluctance to get involved in the financial dispute. The defence argued the messages illustrated a brief episode of tension and give a distorted impression of the relationships. Ms Patterson told the court she began foraging for mushrooms during Victoria's COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020. Some months before the fateful lunch, 2 sightings of death cap mushrooms near Leongatha at Loch and Outram were logged on a citizen science website. The prosecution used mobile phone data from network towers showing Erin Patterson had travelled to both areas to seek out the poisonous species. But Ms Patterson's lawyers raised questions over the accuracy of the mobile phone tower data and denied she foraged at either site. Ms Patterson told authorities the mushrooms used in the fatal beef Wellington were a mixture of fresh mushrooms from a supermarket and dried mushrooms purchased from an Asian grocer, which she had stored in a plastic container. Taking the stand in the trial, she told the jury under cross-examination she now believes it was possible foraged mushrooms were also in that container. Prosecutors labelled the story about the Asian grocer a lie, and Ms Patterson was unable to identify the store. They argued she has avoided eating the poisoned food herself by making individual Wellingtons instead of a single large one, and by colour-coding the plates used to serve the meal. Surviving guest Ian Patterson told the jury Erin served her meal on an orange plate and the guests on grey plates. But Ms Patterson said she didn't own a matching set of plates and all the beef Wellingtons were the same. By the morning after the lunch, all 4 guests were sick in hospital. Less than a week later, on August 4th, sisters Gail and Heather died. The following day, Don Patterson also died. Then, nearly 2 months after he was admitted to hospital and after a stint in intensive care, The sole surviving guest, Ian Wilkinson, was discharged. The defendant also visited hospital after the lunch, but doctors told the court she showed no signs of death cap poisoning. The prosecution told jurors she had faked her illness as part of a cover-up, a claim the defence rejected. After being discharged from hospital, Erin Patterson drove to a rubbish tip and dumped a food dehydrator she'd been using to dry foraged mushrooms. She told the court she was scared because she knew death caps were a suspected cause of her guests' illnesses, but says she had never knowingly dehydrated toxic mushrooms. Ms Patterson was arrested and charged in November 2023. Now the jury has reached its verdict, and we will soon discover whether it has found Erin Patterson guilty or not guilty on the 4 charges. Let's now go back to Latrobe Valley Magistrates Court in Morwell with Alexandra Alvaro and Ben Knight. So Ben, just take us through the latest there as we continue to await that verdict.
Yeah, thanks Miriam. As we know, the verdict exists. We don't know what it is yet. The jury room has alerted the court that there is a verdict. That verdict will be delivered when the court resumes its normal afternoon sitting, which every day is due to happen at 2:15 p.m, so we're about 11 minutes away from that. We have reporters obviously inside the court, inside the overflow room there. Not just ours, pretty much every news organisation that you can think of is represented here, and they all flooded inside as soon as that word came through about 10 minutes ago. So as soon as we know what the verdict is, we're going to bring it to you. But Alex, we were just talking about the presentation of the case, the summing up by both the prosecution and the defence, and you were telling us when the prosecution said in those final days of the trial, here is what we want you to consider. What were they saying?
Yeah, so essentially the prosecution outlined 4 calculated deceptions that they say Erin Patterson carried out before, during and after that beef Wellington lunch. The first calculated deception, they say, is that Erin Patterson lied about having cancer in order to create a pretense for the lunch. So she created this lie in order to create a reason to host these people and as an excuse to why her children wouldn't be there. Now, Erin Patterson denies this, and I might go through the denials in the defence's case when we get to it. So this might sound a bit one-sided, but we'll get to the defence's case in a moment. That second calculated deception that the prosecution alleges is that Erin Patterson hid the death cap mushrooms in those individual beef Wellingtons, that she fed herself a non-tainted version of that meal and she fed her guests poisoned ones. And the prosecution says that the way that she did this was by making, as I say, individual beef Wellingtons. The prosecution pointed out that the recipe that she used from Recipe Tin Eats called for a long log, if you like, of beef in that beef Wellington. Instead, Erin Patterson made the decision to create individual beef Wellingtons, and the prosecution says that she did that as a way to not poison herself. And the other way that they said she didn't poison herself was by colour coding the plates, if you like. The prosecution's alleged that Erin Patterson served herself on an orangey tan plate and served her guests on grey plates, another thing that Erin Patterson denies. The third calculated deception that Dr. Nanette Rogers, SC, the lead prosecutor in this case, pointed out, she said that Erin Patterson feigned illness in the aftermath of the lunch. That is a big point of dispute in this case. Was Erin Patterson genuinely unwell after the lunch? Did she eat the same poisoned meal as her lunch guests? They say that one of the reasons they believe that she was feigning illness is that she left the hospital when she was told that she needed death cap mushroom treatment. And the fourth calculated deception, the prosecution says, is that she engaged in a cover-up. She told lies after the lunch. Some of them are agreed lies. Erin Patterson admits to lying about foraging for mushrooms, about disposing, owning a dehydrator. She admits that she told those lies. But the prosecution also alleges that she lied about her phones, that she handed police a dummy phone, if you like, and concealed her real phone. The prosecution also outlined, of course, that dehydrator that she dumped in the aftermath of the lunch. So those are those 4 deceptions that the prosecution say Erin Patterson carried out. They also said, Dr. Nanette Rogers had this quote, she said that Erin Patterson exercised control over the ingredients in the beef Wellington to devastating effect. And in closing those closing arguments, she pointed out a fifth deception. She said the fifth deception that Erin Patterson has carried out are the lies that she's told to you, the jury, and that was quite a theatrical moment in her closing address.
So we'll come to the defence closing in a moment. Just to remind you that we're at the Latrobe Valley Courthouse. We are waiting on a verdict in the Erin Patterson trial. We know that there is a verdict. The judge and the court have been alerted by the jury that they do have a verdict. The court is due to convene for its afternoon session at 2:15. That's in 7 minutes from now. So once we know what that verdict is, we'll certainly bring it to you. So that was the prosecution summing up. Tell us about how the defence closed, because obviously their role here, or their goal, was to try and introduce some reasonable doubt. How did they do that? What was the closing statement?
Yeah, so the defence's argument was essentially that the deaths, the poisoning, it was all a tragic accident, that Erin Patterson didn't seek out death cap mushrooms on purpose. And in Erin Patterson's testimony, she also gave an account as to how it was possible that forage mushrooms might have made their way into the meal. She said that she had this habit of foraging for mushrooms, and that was something that developed in the COVID years, back in 2020, when you could only go outside for a really short period of time. She said that, she'd go on walks, and once she spotted these mushrooms growing out near her home, and once she became confident in identifying what they were, she chopped a little bit off one, she fried it up with some butter at home, and she ate it. And her defence lawyer said to her, "What happened next?" And she said, "Well, tasted good, I didn't get sick." And so, after that, if I ever saw similar mushrooms growing and I felt confident in identifying them, then I'd pick them and I'd eat them, and I'd even put them in meals that I fed to my kids. She said that she purchased a dehydrator because the season for mushroom foraging is actually quite short. We learned a lot about mushrooms and foraging in this trial, but the season is quite short, she said, so she'd purchased a dehydrator not just to dehydrate mushrooms, she said, but also to, dehydrate mushrooms and make sure she had access to these mushrooms all year round, and she'd store them in a Tupperware container in her pantry. Now, when it comes to the making of the lunch, she also ran through that. She said that the source, she told authorities at the time that the source of the mushrooms in the lunch were fresh from Woolworths in Leongatha and also dried from an Asian grocer. She'd bought these mushrooms from an Asian grocer for another dish. She thought they smelled a bit strong, she says, so she put them back in her cupboard in a Tupperware container, which is really key. She says that when she was making the mushroom component, the duxelle component of that beef Wellington, she tasted it, she thought it tasted a little bit bland, and so she reached for these dried mushrooms that she'd purchased from the Asian grocer, she says, and she added them to the meal. And her defence lawyer, Colin Mandy SC, he asked her, what do you now believe was in that Tupperware container? And she said, "I now believe that it's possible that forage mushrooms were in there too." We also heard about Erin Patterson's battles with self-esteem, and just a content warning here, I'm about to discuss eating disorders and disordered eating, if any of our audience want to turn away at this point. But Erin Patterson essentially said that she'd been battling low self-esteem for most of her life. She'd never had a healthy relationship with food, and when it came to the day of the lunch, when the guests had all left, she said that there was about 2/3 of an orange cake left, and she ate a slice and then another one and then another one. She kind of laid it out in this way. And she said that eventually she'd eaten all the cake, it was all gone, and later she was feeling a little bit overfull, she was feeling a bit sick, so she took herself to the bathroom and she vomited it back up. And this is one of the points that the defence relies on as a reason as to why Erin Patterson didn't get as sick as her guests. They say that Erin Patterson did become sick, just not as sick as them. Part of that reason is because Erin Patterson says she vomited it up. Other reasons, factors, would be her age and her weight. These are some of the arguments by the defence. When it comes to that alleged cancer lie, Erin Patterson denied telling the guests that she had cancer. Instead, she said that she misled the guests about her health, that she'd been having some investigations about ovarian cancer, but that she might need some treatment in the future, and she misled them in that way because she had actually planned to get lap band surgery, and she knew she'd need some help with the kids, and that's why she told that lie, because she was too too embarrassed to tell them that she was having some issues with her weight and needed to have that surgery. When it comes to the dehydrator and what the prosecution calls incriminating conduct, the lies that she told, Erin Patterson says, she was scared. It was this knee-jerk reaction. And at times, Erin Patterson's testimony was actually quite emotional, especially when talking about her own children, when talking about the lunch guests and the affection that she said she had for them. But basically, in closing, Colin Mandy, SC, Erin Patterson's defence lawyer, told the jury Erin Patterson is not on trial for being a liar, and he reiterated that twice. And he also spoke about reasonable doubt, as you say. He said, if you think that it's possible that Erin Patterson deliberately poisoned her guests, then not guilty. If you think that it's, maybe she poisoned her guests deliberately, not guilty. If you think that it's possible that she poisoned her guests deliberately, not guilty. So really honing that reasonable doubt element.
It's 14 minutes past 2. The jury, the court, will reconvene at 15 minutes past 2, so we are moments away from that happening. It'll obviously take a bit of time for the jury to come in and take their places, for the legal teams and for others to come in. I can tell you it's not just people who have been going into the courtroom. You can probably hear it being called behind me here, but it's interesting to see the words got around, and we're seeing a lot of the community have turned up here at the court to sort of hear this verdict as it comes out. So we're not in there, but as soon as we get the message, we'll bring it to you. It's worth pointing out that we are on day one of the 11th week of a case that was supposed to go for 5 or 6, Alex?
Yeah, 5 to 6 weeks, and we're now in week 11. And I think the reason for that was just the sheer amount of evidence that they had to get through in this case, and also some of that evidence was quite technical. We heard from a telecommunications expert, from a digital forensic IT expert from Victoria Police, and some of that evidence was just so granular. We really got down to the basis of that evidence, especially in terms of that forensic analyst. We started with the question, what is a computer? So when you're starting from that base, and we have to address jury members, we can't assume any knowledge. So it's important that we really get to the root of, what the evidence is. There was some really technical evidence. And then, of course, we had Erin Patterson in the witness box for 8 days. Her evidence in chief and then her cross-examination. These things take a lot of time. And then you've got the judge's charge, and Justice Beale was very obviously being just so intentional and making sure he ran through every single point, because, there's a lot at stake here. Yeah,
that struck me. I'm sure people would be reasonably familiar with the idea that the prosecution and the defence teams present their summing up of the case, and then it's the role of the judge to what's called charge the jury, essentially give them their instructions to go into the jury room. And this took, it was about 3 days, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3 or 4 days, yeah. And as you say, it's a really important part of the legal process, and as Justice Beale said to the jurors, you are the judges in this case, so they really have to, be schooled on those legal principles and how to apply the law to the evidence in this case.
Having said that, there aren't really any rules. Oh, there are rules, but there's no sort of blueprint for what each particular jury does when it gets inside the jury room. But clearly it's a case of going through the evidence, and so they've now been deliberating. I think this is for the 6th day. The jury does have
7th, I believe.
7th, thank you. The jury does have the option, if it chooses, to pose a question to the judge, perhaps if it's seeking a bit of guidance. That hasn't happened in this case.
We haven't seen that.
No.
Yeah, interestingly, we haven't seen that. But the other interesting point is that the jurors can all rely on different pieces of evidence to come to their verdict. All that really matters is that they come to a unanimous verdict. So they all have to agree, but they can rely on different bits of evidence to get to that point.
Okay, so it's 17 minutes past 2. Court started at 2:15. As I say, if you're just joining us, we're at the Latrobe Valley Court, and just behind us here, court is reconvening in courtroom number 4 for the Erin Patterson murder trial. The jury say that they do have a verdict. It may well be being read out in court as we speak. As soon as we know what it is, we'll bring it to you. Alex, you were in court for a lot of this. What was it like?
Oh, it was actually really busy at some points, especially when Erin Patterson was in the witness box. The courtroom was full, and we had just these lines outside the courthouse here, even starting at 6:30 in the morning, just so people could get a seat. And I'm sure we'll talk about the intense media interest in this case soon, but sometimes it was really packed, sometimes it wasn't. Importantly, Erin Patterson was there. She sat just behind the media allocated seats. And often she was, just looking on, watching on quite neutrally. Sometimes she showed a bit of emotion, but yeah, it was really interesting to be in the courtroom at some points. There's also an overflow room. I don't know if some of our audience knows this, but because of the intense interest in this case, there's also a media overflow room. So some of the media sit there, and then there's 6 seats in the courtroom where the media can sit. There are 6 allocated seats, only 6.
Only 6 seats, yeah. And that's also, I guess, slightly unusual that the case was held here in the Latrobe Valley. There's a lot to go through. Just got a message. No, that's not the verdict. We'll bring it to you when it comes. There's a lot to go through. A lot of people, I'm sure viewers would be extremely well aware, have been following this case intensely closely. There has been no shortage of coverage, and I think it's because as you say, Alex, there has been so much to go through. It's I guess in the way that the evidence was presented, it's not a sort of classic murder trial. It was some of the evidence was very
Ben, I might
convoluted.
just stop you there. I think we have a verdict.
We do. Would you like to bring it to us?
We do. So what we can now tell you is that Erin Patterson has been found by guilty of 12, guilty on all charges.
Guilty on all charges. That's a unanimous verdict. So that is 3 counts of murder.
3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. So guilty of the murder of Don Patterson, her father-in-law, guilty of the murder of Gail Patterson, her mother-in-law, and then also guilty of the murder of Heather Wilkinson, and guilty of the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson.
Okay.
The sole surviving guest of the lunch.
The sole surviving guest of the lunch,
Yeah.
who was in court for much of this.
He was. He I actually haven't seen him today. It'd be interesting to know if he's up in the courtroom today, but he was there every day after he gave evidence, and we saw a lot of stoicism from Ian. He was often just watching on quite neutrally. Sometimes he would, hold his daughter's hand, but even during that really harrowing evidence, hearing of the terrible illness that the deceased went through, just really quite stoic. Yeah.
So just getting a message that Erin Patterson sat expressionless as the verdicts were read out. We'll get more information coming through, but just to repeat, if you've just joined us, Erin Patterson has been found guilty on all charges. That's 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Alex, it's been a remarkable case. We're going to stay here. We're going to stay with the coverage because there's quite a bit to go through, and it's quite interesting to talk about. Where should we start? Should we look? Let's actually start with Erin Patterson herself, because the prosecution called more than 50 witnesses in this case, as we were talking about,
Erin Patterson,
including Erin Patterson. But so she was the one who was clearly in the witness box for the longest.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I guess we were able to see a pretty complete picture of who Erin Patterson is as a person, and we heard that from multiple witnesses. She's 50 years old, she's got 2 kids. Her maiden name is Scudder, Erin Scudder, she was born. And from Simon Patterson's evidence, we heard that, he said she was quite intelligent, quite smart, quite witty, and he said that's what initially drew him to her in the first place when they first met, when they were both working at the Monash City Council. She was working as the RSPCA rep, he was working as a civil engineer. And we also heard about, her love of learning. Simon said that she'd undertaken a degree in business and accounting, and she had worked as an accountant before they met, and that she'd also worked as an air traffic controller. She was a qualified air traffic controller before they met as well. She had worked at Tullamarine Airport. And then we also heard that while they were together, she had undertaken various degrees, legal courses, a vet nurse course, and that in 2023 she had actually intended to undertake study as a nurse. So from all accounts, someone who has this love of knowledge. We also learned that her grandmother had passed away, and she had passed on this big inheritance to Erin Patterson, $2 million worth of inheritance. And the defence had pointed that out to say, Erin Patterson had money was no motive for Erin Patterson because she had this money and she had, gained this inheritance over 8 years. It had been drip-fed to her and she'd used it to purchase properties, and she'd also loaned some of this money to Simon Patterson's siblings, loans in the tens. Sorry, Ben.
So this was quite interesting because
Yeah.
one of the questions that was being raised throughout this trial by observers was, where is the motive? Now, clearly, what the prosecution presented was evidence of some terse or angry
acrimony.
messages,
Yeah.
acrimonious messages,
Yeah.
but. I guess the defence was saying, look, it was a one-off. It was a bad few days. This was not emblematic of the relationship with the rest of the family. And what you talked about, loaning other members of the family money. So that motive issue was quite an interesting one.
Exactly. So we had these two kind of conflicting accounts. Basically, the prosecution saying, trying to highlight these tensions that she had with Simon Patterson's family and Simon Patterson himself, and then the defence saying, it was just a blip. We heard from Simon Patterson that they had a disagreement over money. They'd separated in 2015. They'd maintained this relatively good relationship. They were friendly, and then in 2022, late in that year, Simon had listed himself as separated on his tax return, and Erin had found that out, and she confronted him about it. And she said, "I'm going to be claiming child support now." And then there were disagreements about that and who would be paying for what. Did Simon have to foot in extra money for, school fees, for medical appointments? And so the defence says, this was just a blip. They had a good relationship, and, but the prosecution said, this actually bled into her relationship with her in-laws, with the deceased, with Gail and Don Patterson. She had tried to get them involved, tried to get them to kind of adjudicate in this matter, and they hadn't. And the prosecution essentially said, Erin Patterson resented them for that. So there are these two conflicting accounts, and there was one quite tense point in cross-examination while Erin Patterson was in the witness box where, she was asked, Dr. Net Rogers essentially said to her, you didn't love them. And you had these two faces. You had this public face where, you said you loved them and you told Simon's family that you loved Don and Gail, but then you had this private face which we saw in these Facebook messages that I think you're referring to, where Erin Patterson would mock them for their religion, according to the prosecution. So, in those Facebook messages, essentially, Erin Patterson was telling her internet friends that she wanted nothing more to do with the family. She had tried to get Don and Gail to adjudicate, but it just didn't work. The prosecution alleged that the emojis she was using in those messages were eye roll emojis. There was some dispute about that. But essentially the prosecution were attempting to make out that, they didn't have a good relationship in actuality. But the prosecution did admit, though, that they didn't have a motive when it comes to this case. They wouldn't be putting forward a motive as such when it comes to this case, and they actually don't have to because, motive is not an element of murder. So I'm just looking behind because there's just a bit of movement.
I should tell you that if there are any comments made outside of court by anyone, we will be bringing them to you. We won't be bringing them to you live, just in case there are any legal issues concerned there, but we'll be turning those around and bringing them to you just as quickly as we can. If you're just joining us, we're broadcasting live from the Latrobe Valley Courthouse. Inside, Erin Patterson has been found guilty on all 4 charges. That is 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. We've just been talking about motive as an issue in the case. So much of this was actually very technical and some really interesting technical aspects of it. But let's go back to where we were before, talking about Erin Patterson in court and giving her evidence. And you mentioned that at times she was quite emotional.
She was, especially when talking about her own children and about the relationship. There was one moment where she was talking about her relationship with Heather Wilkinson. She was asked, why did you invite these people over for lunch? And she said that she wanted to thank Heather for being a friend to her. She said she used to go to playgroup to bring her kids, and Heather was always the one who would sit with her, and she became quite emotional when she was talking about that. But then when she was being cross-examined, there were also some quite tense exchanges. She seemed to she seemed to really be quite particular on the point, and so there were some relatively tense exchanges between her and the lead prosecutor in the case. So there was a lot of emotion, but also there was some serious moments as well.
And speaking of emotion and evidence, Erin Patterson's children gave evidence in this case, sort of?
Kind of. So they gave video evidence, essentially. They weren't subject to cross-examination. You know, as kids, they don't have to be called in front of a jury and give evidence. They're not compelled, especially as the children of the accused. But they were interviewed by police before the trial took place. So the interview took place in the days and weeks after the lunch, and they were asked about their account of the day of the lunch and what they knew about their mum, and it was difficult to watch at some points. You know, you've got Erin Patterson's daughter, only 9 years old at the time, just this small girl. You know, on the podcast, Mushroom Case Daily, she was just described as being swallowed by this chair, which I think is absolutely right. Her feet were dangling off the chair, and she had coloured pencils just looking.
Can you see who that is, Alex? We'll.
I'm just going to jump out of the way.
We're at the Latrobe Valley Courthouse. Obviously, that's a big media scrum. I believe that is. Who
have we got in there?
The legal team.
Who is that?
You would know better than I, Alex.
Okay.
If you can see.
We've heard that it's potentially an associate of Erin Patterson.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of the people who has turned up here to hear this verdict, which, just to reiterate, if you've just joined us, Erin Patterson guilty on all 4 counts, 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder.
Yep.
You were talking about the evidence of the children, how Erin's daughter, 9 years old at the time, that she conducted that police interview that was replayed to the court.
Yeah, and Erin Patterson's son as well. But when it comes to the daughter, you know, she was asked about the day of the lunch. She said that her mother had told her that she wouldn't be there for the lunch because they were going to be talking about adult stuff, something that Erin Patterson denied kind of saying. She said that on the day of the lunch she went for lunch and to the movies with her brother and a friend, and that they returned later that night. She was asked, have you ever been mushroom foraging with your mum? Like, have you ever seen mushrooms out in the wild while you've been with your mum? She said no. So yeah, there were some interesting points. The kids were also asked, you know, about their mum's symptoms in the days after the lunch. You know, how did mum seem? The daughter said that she thought she saw her mum go to the toilet about 10 times. The son said, you know, mum had told me she was unwell.
Obviously, we're talking here about Erin Patterson and her physical health after the lunch that obviously killed 3 people and made another one severely ill. So Erin Patterson clearly didn't get as sick, but she did talk about the symptoms that she had, the time that she spent in hospital.
Yep.
Just talk us through that.
Yeah, so Erin Patterson rocked up to Leongatha Hospital 2 days after the lunch complaining of gastro symptoms. The doctor who saw her, Dr. Chris Webster, told the court that he was the one who welcomed her into the hospital. He understood that she was the 5th attendee of that lunch, and he had told her that, you know, this is a suspected death cap mushroom poisoning case. Like, we need you to get some serious treatment now. And it's at that point that just after then, you know, she was only at the hospital for about 5 minutes, and then the doctor said she discharged herself against medical advice. You know, we saw CCTV of the nurses there trying to kind of tell her, you know, you've got to stay, this is serious. And then, well, that's what they told the court they were saying to her. And then, by all accounts, Erin Patterson left the hospital. What she did in between the time that she had left the hospital and come back, we don't know. Erin Patterson said that she had to sort out some stuff for her kids. That she needed to go home and sort out things with the kids and animals. You know, she wasn't ready to be admitted. The prosecution says that this is the point where she panicked. You know, she had just been found out, essentially, is what the prosecution is saying. So this is a point that, again, the prosecution relies on as incriminating evidence, something that Erin Patterson did because she knew she was guilty and she had to conceal her guilt. So that's the hospital visit. But yeah, Erin Patterson says that she was having, and I apologise, we do have to talk about poo a lot in this case because diarrhoea is one of the symptoms of death cap mushroom poisoning. She says that she was having diarrhoea, but she was discharged from hospital a couple days later. But we heard accounts from the nurses who saw her, the paramedics. One nurse said, you know, she didn't seem sick. You know, she compared her to Ian Wilkinson, the surviving guest. She said that he could barely lift his head off off the pillow. But Erin Patterson seemed to be upright, you know. We heard from a paramedic who said that she seemed calm and nonchalant during her journey to another hospital when she was being transferred. So lots of differing accounts. You know, we also heard from a doctor who analysed Erin Patterson's medical records. You know, after the fact, he didn't actually treat Erin Patterson, but he said that, you know, there was no evidence of an acute liver injury, which you would see with death cap mushroom poisoning. But there was, he did think that she had this diarrhea. Yeah.
It's worth talking about just the horrible way that those three people died. What did we hear about that?
Yeah, this was really sad, and I think probably one of the most memorable days for me. You know, we heard from Dr. Stephen Warillo. He's an ICU practitioner at the Austin Hospital. He's a doctor, and he basically oversaw the treatment of those 4 guests. And when they got to the Austin Hospital, they were all in, you know, multiple organ failure. They were dying. They had to be incubated, and essentially doctors threw everything they could at them. You know, they were receiving the best treatment that they could possibly give them. There was vitamin C infusions, charcoal as a treatment, which was also quite interesting to learn about. They were receiving this medication that we've referred to in the trial as NAC. It has a very long name, but it's essentially a liver-saving treatment so that your liver doesn't become as sick. They received all this treatment. Don actually received a liver transplant. Wow. Which ultimately just wasn't enough to save his life. You know, they all died within the week, essentially. On the 4th and 5th of August, they had all passed away, except for Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest. And while those other guests were passing away while they were dying, Ian actually turned a corner. He was actually getting better. And, you know, I say turn a corner, it sounds like he's all of a sudden out of bed. You know, it was a slow recovery. He was extremely unwell. And it took a very long time for him to get better. He was, you know, in a coma, in hospital for almost 2 months.
And yet he was here pretty much every day.
Yeah, which is extraordinary to see, you know, someone bounce back from such a severe illness. Yeah.
So you talked before, when you talked about Erin Patterson discharging herself from hospital against the advice of the staff of the emergency room, and how the prosecution described that as, you know, the moment of panic.
Yeah.
But that sort of moment of panic, if you like, I think was also something that was referenced by the defence, because if you talk about some of the actions that Erin Patterson took in the days after that lunch, and while they might seem suspicious, it was essentially said, look, this was someone who realised that something had gone horribly wrong and wasn't thinking straight. Is that a fair reflection?
Yeah, exactly. I guess the defence was essentially saying to the jury in closing, you know, there's no handbook on human behaviour. No one knows how they would act in that situation. You know, Erin Patterson thought, you know, had the understanding at this point that what she'd done had hurt these people, and she thought that, you know, she'd be unfairly looked upon at that point and accused. And so, you know, when it comes to the dehydrator even, she said, you know, child protection was coming that day, and I knew that they'd look at the dehydrator and ask questions, so I had to get rid of it. So these are the sorts of explanations, innocent explanations, that the defence brought up as a way to counter that so-called incriminating conduct that the prosecution put forward.
Well, I've just had a note. Obviously, we saw one of Erin Patterson's friends just leave the court a very short time ago. She did make a couple of comments. She said that she was saddened by the verdict. She said, I didn't have any expectations. It's the justice system and it has to be what it is. She said she did not know how Erin Patterson was feeling as the verdict was delivered, or whether she planned to appeal. She said, quote, I'm her friend. I'll see her, I will visit with her. Yeah. So we're not expecting much outside of the court today, I don't think. That's pretty much what the media's been told.
Exactly. Well, you know, Erin Patterson, you know, she won't be walking out the doors, obviously. If there was a not guilty verdict, that's what we were expecting. But, you know, Erin Patterson will be taken back to Dame Phyllis Frost, essentially, where she'll stay for a little while. And next in this process, of course, is the sentencing. So court will reconvene. I don't have a date yet, but I'm sure Justice Beale would have spoken about a next date for this. We'll have some sentencing hearings, and essentially what will happen is, you know, we'll hear submissions, arguments from the prosecution and defence about, you know, what they think the judge should take into account when it comes to sentencing. We might we might hear, victim impact statements. Now, I believe we've got some comments from outside court, so I think we'll throw to them now. Let's have a look.
How are you feeling?
I'm saddened, and it is what it is. Thank you.
Did you have a chance to talk to Erin, though?
Did you
think that Erin was capable of something like this? She's a triple murderer.
Were you expecting your friend to be found not guilty?
I didn't have any expectations. It's the justice system, and it has to be what it is.
What did Erin say to you in the moments before she was taken away?
When that verdict came down?
Ali, she said to you, see you soon. Were you hoping to see her?
I will.
Was Erin confident that she would walk? Those tarps went up at her house.
Was she positive that she would walk free?
Ali, when you say you will see her again, do you believe she will appeal this verdict?
I'm her friend, and I'll see her. I'll visit with her.
Was Erin confident that she would walk today? Did you think she was going to get out?
I don't know.
How do you think she was feeling in that moment?
I don't know.
Do you believe her that this was an accident?
That's not a question I can answer for you.
What do you think she would want to say to the families, to her extended family that have lost their lives?
I could just get to my car, guys. I'm doing really good now. Thank you.
Come on, guys, enough now.
Thank you.
So you join us here live from the Latrobe Valley Court. You saw just then a friend of Erin Patterson leaving the court. We're not expecting to see too much outside the court today. Whatever else comes, we will bring to you. Obviously, we have just heard that there is a guilty verdict in the Erin Patterson murder trial. 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. I'm here with Alex Alvaro, who's been covering this case for much of the 11 weeks, nearly 10 and a bit that it's been running. And we're talking about the people who were at the lunch, those who didn't survive, but the one survivor was also someone who gave evidence. That must have been a pretty remarkable moment.
Yeah, a key witness in this trial, the only other person who was at this lunch apart from Erin Patterson. That's Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest of the lunch, and he gave evidence about the relationship that he had with Erin beforehand. He said that they were really just more like acquaintances, and that he and Heather, his wife, had thought, why the sudden invite? It wasn't normal for them to go to Erin Patterson's home. And he also gave evidence about the day of the lunch. He spoke about the plates, which seemed to be quite a big point here. He said that Erin Patterson served herself on an orangey tan plate and the guests on grey plates. Now, Erin Patterson disputes this. She says that Ian Wilkinson was honestly mistaken when he was talking about this, but the prosecution used this to say, this is how Erin Patterson separated her food from the guests. This is how she gave herself a non-tainted meal and gave her guests a tainted meal. Ian Wilkinson also spoke about, that they had entered the home, that Heather was also looking to do a bit of a renovation in the kitchen, so there was a lot of interest around the pantry, but he said that Erin was reluctant to show them her pantry. He also said that the women, Gail and Heather, had asked Erin, do you need some help plating up, and that Erin had, had refused that help in plating up the food. So that's what we heard from Ian. Now, the other key thing that we heard from Ian was about this alleged cancer lie, essentially. So it was Ian's evidence that Erin Patterson told the guests that she had been diagnosed with cancer. Now, Erin disputes this. She says, I didn't tell them I had cancer. I didn't say I had a diagnosis. I said there were some investigations underway and that I might be needing treatment in the future. And she said the reason that she did that is because she was planning to have lap band surgery, but she didn't want to tell them because she was embarrassed, but she knew she'd need some help with the kids. And so that's the reason that she told them, or she misled them, rather. Now, this was kind of queried during the trial. The prosecution asked Erin, did you have an appointment for this? And Erin came back with, yeah, I did actually. It was at the Enrich Clinic. And so the next day the prosecution came back and they said, they essentially put to Erin Patterson, the Enrich Clinic doesn't do gastric bypass surgery. And Erin said, I'm a bit puzzled by that. I'm confused. Maybe it was, another type of surgery. Maybe it was liposuction. I was looking into weight loss in general. So that was another kind of key dispute in this trial.
And it's interesting. I mean, there have been lies told by Erin Patterson, but as you said, when the defence was doing its summing up, it said that's not really, that's not your reasonable doubt. And even I think in the charging of the jury by Justice Beale, I think there's a phrase he used. This is not a court of morals; it's a court of laws. What did he mean?
Well, I suppose, don't take those lies and make the jump to convicting her. He kind of took the defence's side on that a little bit. I'm not saying that Justice Beale is an impartial operator here. He's not on anyone's side. But his and the defence's take on that were a little bit similar in that, you can't use that to kind of convict her of these very serious crimes. Yeah.
You're at the Latrobe Valley Courthouse, live on ABC News Channel. We have heard about half an hour ago now that Erin Patterson has been found guilty on all counts. That's 4 counts, 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. I'm here with Alexandra Alvaro, ABC News reporter, who has been here for pretty much all of it. As we say, a 5 to 6 week trial that has now just entered its 11th week. But we do have a verdict.
With some intense media interest as well, I should say.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, I mean, I've really sort of got my first look at it on the last day of the trial. I've seen some big cases. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this.
No, neither. I think this is definitely the biggest case I've covered. Even you can probably see outside, if I just move out of the way, like all of these people here in the one spot. The Latrobe Valley Law Courts has never seen a case like this with this many people. And the courtroom's not really made for it. It's a small courtroom, as you've been in there too, Ben, haven't you? I don't know what it was about this case. It might have been the unusual kind of, the mushroom element. It's unusual. The fact that it focused around this relatively mundane aspect of life, a family lunch. Could that be it? Or maybe Erin Patterson, is she someone who people can relate to? I'm not sure. But nonetheless, there's been, really intense media and international media as well,
Absolutely.
I should say.
Yes, I mean, we also know that true crime is just incredibly popular as content, and I can tell you we've seen at least one documentary crew here filming, so there's going to be at least one on the way. Possibly more. We don't know. Oh, the podcasts.
The BBC.
Yep.
You've got the Daily Mail from the UK here. Just so many people.
Reuters have been covering this for international media. Have been seeing it pop up on CNN. Yeah, it's as you say. Why this particular case? Others are better placed to say than us. But we do have a guilty verdict. So for now, it's over. As you said, we've got sentencing to come, but I guess there's also the possibility of an appeal. We just have to wait and find out what happens.
Yeah, and that'll be up for Erin Patterson and her legal team to decide whether there's an appeal that could be on foot later on. But as I say, it's up to Justice Beale now to sentence Erin Patterson. That'll happen over the coming weeks and months. I should say that the severity of the crime and Erin Patterson's plea, that all kind of comes into what Justice Beale ultimately hands down as his sentence.
All right, as we said, there's been a lot of evidence in this case, some of it quite technical. As we said, this was a case that was thought was going to go for about 5 or 6 weeks. It's gone for more than 10, and that's because there simply was so much to go through. Let's go to some of the technical evidence now. So people, I think probably if people know anything about this case, they would know about the dinner plates. It's very visual.
Yes.
I think we can also...
In my conversations with people, that's really stuck out for some reason. Yeah.
But there's also the issue of the phones and the dehydrator. I think the dehydrator probably goes into behaviour after the lunch. We'll come back to that. But let's talk about the phones. Now, this one was pretty deep.
Pretty complicated to follow, but I can sum it up for you. Essentially, we'll talk about phone A and phone B. There was also phone C, but I'm going to cast that aside for the minute. So phone A is the phone that prosecutors alleged was never found. Police were never able to find it, and they say that this was Erin Patterson's real phone and that she'd used it potentially to research death cap mushrooms. That we'll never know. There was never any evidence to that effect that Erin Patterson had done that. But police had also alleged that while police were searching her home on the 5th of August, about a week after the lunch, police had alleged that while that was happening, Erin Patterson took the SIM card out of phone A and put it into another phone. There's also phone B. This is the phone that Erin Patterson did hand to police. This is what prosecutors say was a dummy phone, that she gave it to them to conceal her real phone and gave them this kind of decoy phone. On this phone, the forensic analyst found that this had been factory reset 4 times. The first one was kind of non-suspicious. I think it was her son that had carried out that one, but then there were 3 factory resets afterwards, and some of them had been conducted after the phone was taken into police custody, so she was actually doing that remotely. And she admitted to doing that. She said, I wanted to just see if they'd left the network on, essentially.
So again, this comes down to Erin Patterson's behaviour after the lunch, knowing that 4 people were either seriously ill or already dead, and talking about things like remotely factory resetting a mobile phone while it was in the police evidence room.
Right.
So this comes back to what the defence was saying. You can't judge that behaviour because it's not proof of anything. Throwing a dehydrator into the rubbish is you can't predict, or you can't dictate how someone would feel. Knowing what they know about what happened at lunch, it's not necessarily evidence of guilt.
Yeah, and then there was also the evidence found by forensic analysts on her computer. After the lunch, they seized a bunch of computers and phones from her home. They managed to seize a computer, and prosecutors say on that computer there had been a visit to the iNaturalist website. This is a citizen science website that we heard about a lot during this trial. It's where people can kind of post their observations of flora, fauna, and they say that there was a visit on this computer to the iNaturalist website, and specifically a page about death cap mushrooms, a death cap mushroom sighting in Moorabbin, which is a suburb in Melbourne. Erin Patterson said she didn't remember carrying out that search. It could have been me, but I don't remember that search specifically. And then, of course, there's the cell tower evidence, which was incredibly convoluted and complicated. We heard from Dr. Matthew Sorrell. That's not a slide on Dr. Matthew Sorrell, but it's difficult to get your head around. Essentially, prosecutors say that Erin Patterson's phone had connected to cell towers in the towns of Lock and Outram. And these are towns where we'd heard previously in the trial, death cap mushrooms had been sighted. There was Dr. Tom May, he's a mycologist. He said that he'd spotted death cap mushrooms in Outram. He'd posted to the iNaturalist website. And then there was Christine McKenzie. She was a former poisons hotline specialist, and she said that she had found death cap mushrooms in Lock, and then she posted that to the iNaturalist website. Now, the prosecution essentially alleges they've said that Erin Patterson saw these posts. Essentially, they put this to her. You saw these posts, and then you went and sought out death cap mushrooms. Erin Patterson denied that.
Look, we'll get ready to wrap up here from the Latrobe Valley Court. I can just tell you we've had a message that a spokesperson for the Patterson family has just left the court precinct, obviously followed by the significant media scrum. You may hear the news chopper above our head. It doesn't appear like it's going anywhere for the moment. This spokesperson for the Patterson family did not comment as they departed. So look, wrapping it up here, I should tell you, do keep across this coverage this afternoon if this is something that you've been following, because there is more reporting that is on the way. We're not quite ready to bring it to you yet, but it will be brought to you soon. That will be of significant interest. I can guarantee you of that. But okay, we'll leave it here. We'll just say, just to repeat, that Erin Patterson found guilty on all 4 charges. That is 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. Alex Alvaro, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll go back to you, Miriam.
That is our reporters Ben Knight and Alexandra Alvaro there on the scene at Morwell outside of those courts, bringing us the latest. And of course, we will be staying across further developments. But let's stay with this verdict. Now I am joined by former New South Wales Supreme Court Judge and Chair of the Centre for Public Integrity, Anthony Wheely. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us this afternoon on ABC News. Firstly, what do you make of the verdict?
Well, I have to say I wasn't surprised at the verdict. I thought it was quite a powerful Crown case, and my immediate reaction is to say that's precisely the result I anticipated would come. The jury didn't take all that long to consider it, but they took long enough to think carefully about the detailed directions they were given by the judge, and I think that they've come to the right result.
What do you think were the key standout features of the trial, given the length of it? And you say there that it wasn't that unusual for the jury to take this long, but what were some of the standouts, do you feel, in terms of the way that this trial was conducted?
Well, I think at the outset you'd have to say the reason why it caught the public's attention so much, it was a very unusual case, a very unusual allegation of murder. You know, a family lunch, a well-known dish being created and consumed, and then 3 people dead and another nearly dead. So how did it happen? Was it just a terrible accident, or was it something that was contrived and intended? So the prosecution had to take that as their approach, to say we will prove that the accused deliberately created this dish in the knowledge that it was likely to kill these people who consumed it. So that was a pretty high burden they bore. And if the facts were simply the preparation of the dish and its consumption, the Crown would have been hard-pressed to prove its case. But the defendant's own conduct, both in relation to lies that she was alleged to have told and her conduct after the event in a number of respects. There were almost 15 respects in which the Crown said this conduct points to her guilt. It's called consciousness of guilt or an implied admission of guilt. To take one example, the dehydrator, the disposal of that object secretly. Secondly, the resetting of the phones to avoid their content being scrutinised, and lies about her health and her possible treatment for cancer. If you put all those together, they were powerful reasons why the jury would find that there was a deliberate attempt to murder these people, and that's what they've found.
Anthony, Willie, what do you make of the questions around motive in this particular trial?
Well, I think the Crown had to, although the Crown pushed a kind of argument about motive, at the end of the day, there wasn't really a significant situation where motive was established. But as the judge pointed out, in a murder trial, it's not necessary for the Crown to prove motive. After all, we don't ever know why somebody commits murder. I mean, in some cases it may be obvious, but in a case like this, it's not obvious to us, and it may never be obvious to us. But that's not something the Crown has to prove. The defence were very good in the way they picked up on that argument, and they said, oh, well, if you can't show a motive, then how can you show an intention to kill? Well, the answer is, of course, you can, if all of the facts, and particularly the conduct of the defendant after the event, suggests that she knows she's guilty. She's hiding equipment, for example, because she knows that it will point to her guilt if it's found in her possession. All of that is very powerful evidence, and it was here.
And what do you make of, we understand from what our reporters have been gathering with the news there from Morwell, what do you make of the understanding that jurors didn't in fact return any questions to the judge during the course of their deliberations? Is there anything unusual in the way that, this jury has pieced through the various matters of evidence that have been put to them and then come to this determination today?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you have to bear in mind that the judge gave very careful directions over a period of a few days. So they had everything there before them. And he told them to come back to him if they had any questions. And I think that the very careful summing up was sufficient for them to go through it piece by piece and come to the conclusion they did. I wouldn't draw any inference adverse to the way in which the trial was conducted simply because questions weren't asked. In some trials they are, in some trials they aren't. But I think on the whole the judge's directions were very fulsome and very clear, and there was no need for them to seek any further assistance.
What might we expect now in the wait for sentencing to begin?
Well, I think that, sentencing is a difficult procedure. All of us who've practiced as judges know how difficult that is. So I don't envy the judge. On the one hand, he's got he has a defendant here who probably doesn't have any criminal record, who's otherwise an unblemished member of the community. On the other hand, the jury's verdict compels him to find that she deliberately murdered 3 people and tried to murder a 4th, and did so deliberately and in a premeditated manner, very carefully prepared. And so that makes it a pretty serious crime, and I would expect that in the end there will be quite a heavy penalty imposed by the court. There may be an appeal, of course, but that will come later. And in cases like this, the only real appeal could be that the judge has misdirected the jury in some way, or that the jury's verdict is an unreasonable one that would not ordinarily be reached, and which in the opinion of the appeals court ought not to have been reached. So we've got further material awaiting us, but I think we just have to be patient now and wait for the sentencing hearing and see what the judge has to say about that.
Anthony Wheeler, you pointed to the intense media attention that this trial has garnered. What do you make of the way that this trial has actually unfolded amid all of that? And particularly, if we're able to put ourselves in the position of the jurors, obviously we have strict protocols in place around the way that trials are conducted and what jurors are exposed to. But what do you make of the way that the trial's actually been conducted with all of that going on?
Well, I haven't been present at the trial myself, but I've read carefully each day and kept up with the news, as it were, and looked at the news when it's been available. I think the impression I get is that it was a very well-run trial. Despite all the media attention, the media behaved themselves through the trial. They don't always, Miriam, but they did in this case. And I think the jury must have been a very attentive jury. We didn't have any problems there or any misconduct there. And so I think in the end, it really shows that, as far as we can tell as outsiders, that justice has been well and truly done in this case.
Anthony Wheeler, Chair of the Centre for Public Integrity, we really thank you so much for your insights and joining us here on ABC News. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go back now to Latrobe Valley Magistrates Court in Morwell with Alexandra Alvaro and Ben Knight. We understand there it's still quite a busy scene behind you, lots unfolding. Just bring us up to date there on the latest. We think it looks like someone's moving through.
Yep, that was go Alex.
Miriam, that was just Colin Mandy, SC, Erin Patterson's defence lawyer, running through a big media scrum.
And nothing to say we can gather so far. He may have said something outside the doors of the court. If so, we'll bring that to you just as soon as we can turn that around. Just a short time ago, we saw another significant person leave the court, and that was the lead detective, Stephen Eppingstall.
Yep.
A lot of pressure on him in this case.
Yeah, I mean, his evidence was also, that was a testimony that also went for quite a while, and through him, the prosecution was also able to enter Erin Patterson's police interview, and this is the first time we've all seen this interview in which, it happened on the 5th of August. This is just after or before police had searched her home. On the same day as that police search, and she's asked all sorts of questions. Really, she appears quite neutral, but she was asked about her relationship with Don and Gail Patterson, and she said, I love them. They're the only family I have, and they're the only family, the only grandparents my children have, and so she said essentially, I love them. She also, in this police interview, this is where she lies about owning a dehydrator dehydrator and about foraging for mushrooms. She said she's never foraged for mushrooms. So through him, that evidence was able to be entered. And he also spoke about the day that he went to search Erin Patterson's home. He said that when he entered, he told Erin Patterson what they were there for. You know, I'm here because 2 people have died. And Erin Patterson has said who died to him, essentially, when he's entered her home. And then that big police search was conducted. Police seized, you know, phones, computers, all manner of things. Yeah.
So let's talk about who has been in court this whole time, because clearly there's not been enough room for everybody who wanted or needed to get inside that courtroom.
Yeah, so I mean, most importantly, I think we've seen Ian Wilkinson pretty much every day since when he gave evidence. So
the sole survivor. The
sole surviving guest of the lunch. And, you know, he appeared quite stoic, I think, you know, during all of the evidence, even through some really harrowing stuff. But I heard from someone who was in the room today that he actually wasn't in court today. There was a family representative in court, but the family of the deceased weren't in court today.
Yeah. So, as I say, we're not expecting much in the way of comments outside the court this afternoon. Whatever there has been, we'll bring to you. No, it doesn't look like there's anything happening back there at the moment. So, look, we are live here outside the Latrobe Valley Court, where Erin Patterson has been found guilty on all 4 charges. That's 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. Alexandra Alvaro has been here covering much of this 10-week case, an absolute marathon. Look, let's go to where we were just when we first, just before actually, we found out about this verdict, and that's bringing people up to speed with the summing up, the final pitch, the wrapping up of both the prosecution and the defence, which took a few days, but essentially both sides, you know, making their final potted pitch to the jury. Let's start with the prosecution.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, the lead prosecutor was Dr. Nanette Rogers, SC, an incredibly experienced barrister, and she organised her speech, her address to the jury, by outlining 4 calculated deceptions that she says Erin Patterson carried out before, during and after the lunch. She said that she lied about cancer as a way to create a pretense for the lunch and an excuse as to why her kids wouldn't be there, that she then hid death cap mushrooms in this unassuming meal, that she had deliberately gone and picked these death cap mushrooms after seeing that, you know, that they were growing in places near her home, and had picked them. She had concealed them in that beef Wellington lunch by dehydrating them and then blitzing them. And that's also, you know, one of the reasons the prosecution said that, you know, a mycologist actually had a look at the leftovers of the lunch. They were picked out of Erin Patterson's bin. We can talk a bit more about that later, but she looked at them through a microscope, and she actually didn't detect any death cap mushrooms, even though a toxicologist later said that there was death cap mushrooms in there, amatoxins, the toxin that is in death cap mushrooms. You know, she said that she couldn't see them. So the prosecution said that she essentially blitzed these dried mushrooms and hid them in those beef Wellingtons, that she gave herself an untainted meal and served her guests poison. And she did that by colour-coding the plates, giving herself an orange plate, giving the guests grey plates, and also by making individual pasty-like beef Wellingtons. Ian Wilkinson gave evidence that they were kind of like pasty-like, like something you'd get from the bakery. Then there was this third calculated deception. The prosecution says that Erin Patterson feigned illness, essentially, in the aftermath of the lunch, that she wasn't actually sick. The defence, of course, says that she was sick, she just wasn't as sick. The prosecution says that she was lying about being sick, that she, you know, discharged herself against medical advice because she knew she wasn't well and she thought she'd been found out, essentially. And then that fourth calculated deception, that Erin Patterson engaged in cover-up. And one of those points of that cover-up that I haven't spoken about yet is the prosecution says that Erin Patterson lied, Erin Patterson denies this, of course, about feeding the leftovers to her children. You know, that she'd done that in order to cover her tracks, because she knew that, you know, if people thought she'd fed the leftovers to her beloved children, then it would be less likely that they'd think that she'd done it on purpose. You know, another example of this cover-up alleged by the prosecution during the trial was, you know, throwing away a dehydrator that she'd used to dehydrate foraged mushrooms. You know, lying about foraging for mushrooms. That's an admitted lie. Lying about dumping the dehydrator. So those are those 4 calculated deceptions that the prosecution outlined.
And the defence, with obviously trying to introduce an element of reasonable doubt into the minds of the jury, was also saying, hey, a lie is not necessarily evidence of guilt.
Yeah, she's not on trial for being a liar, essentially. So I suppose the defence's main argument was that this was not deliberate and it was not intentional. Erin Patterson didn't deliberately seek out death cap mushrooms. She had foraged for mushrooms and she lied about it, but, she wasn't foraging for death cap mushrooms, and specifically not for the purpose of this lunch at all. That she had this habit of foraging, that she'd, pick mushrooms sometimes that she'd seen growing near her house. And this was a hobby that she'd undertaken, and she owned a dehydrator. She'd sometimes put them in there to preserve them, and then when it came to making the meal, the beef Wellington lunch, she tasted it. She thought it tasted bland when it comes to that mushroom element, so she'd reached into her pantry, and what she thought she was grabbing were these mushrooms that she'd bought from an Asian grocer, she says, that were dried. But instead, she now believes that what was in that Tupperware, well, she says it's now possible that forage mushrooms were mixed in. She also told the jury that after the lunch, she had vomited. She'd essentially vomited the lunch back up. She didn't say she'd vomited the lunch specifically. She said that she essentially had eaten 2/3 of a cake. She felt sick and she brought it back up. This is one of the reasons the defence says that she didn't become as unwell. When it comes to the dehydrator, she says, she was scared. It was this knee-jerk reaction. But as you say, it did come back to this reasonable doubt element. Colin Mandy, SC, told the jury that, if you think it's possible that Erin Patterson deliberately poisoned the meal, you've got to find her not guilty. If you think that maybe she deliberately poisoned the meal, not guilty. If you think that she probably deliberately poisoned the meal, not guilty.
So, as we know, the jury has accepted the narrative of the prosecution, and that is that Erin Patterson did deliberately poison 4 members of her extended family, or her family-in-law, her estranged family-in-law up until that point. 3 of them are dead, so she's been convicted on 3 murder charges. One of them, who survived, she has been convicted on a charge of attempted murder. As you would be well aware, there has been enormous interest in this case. The media throng here at the La Trobe Court here in Morwell has been massive all the way through. There's been an overflow room here in this courthouse to handle all of the media attention, national and international. Of course, it's all focused here at this moment. That's where we'll leave it here for now, though. Plenty more coverage to come on this throughout the day on News Channel. Miriam, we'll go back to you.
Our reporters Ben Knight and Alexandra Alvaro there at Morwell in Victoria. Well, this case has generated, as we've been saying, a huge amount of interest from the public and media, and an appetite for rapid and regular updates. Well, ABC podcast Mushroom Case Daily has been providing listeners with courtroom recaps and behind-the-scenes insights over the course of the trial. ABC reporter Sasha Payne has spoken with one of the hosts, Rachel Brown.
We heard from 53 witnesses during this trial over around 8 weeks, giving evidence. What has been some of the evidence that's really stayed with you?
For me, and I'm a very visual person, and so the image of Erin's daughter on the video statement that she gave, and that this was early in the trial, pre-recorded to save the 2 children the trauma of having to appear in a courtroom, which I think is the right decision. She was 9 at the time when her statement was taken. And just the image of her swallowed by this big green chair and her feet dangling over the edge, and she was in pink trainers, and that really got me. Just how the ripples of this case, and even then thinking whatever way it's going to go, the effect, the multi-generational effect this has had on families, and she's 9, she should be playing Monopoly. She said that they played that weekend, not giving evidence in a triple murder trial, so that really got me.
They had to really, didn't they? Because they were at the house. They lived there, obviously. It's their mum. But it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to watch children essentially having to go through that process, even though it is an important part of the process.
Yeah, and she did really well. It wasn't that. It was just the environment and her voice, she had this bird-like voice, and it just reiterated how vulnerable she is and how little she is. So that image has stayed with me. Ian Wilkinson in the witness box, you know, he lost his love, his best friend, talking about his wife Heather, and that would have been a hard thing to do. And then he's been here most days of the trial, showing lots of grace, may I add, and supported by his family. Then there was the evidence that from Professor Morwell about the effect of Amanita, death cap mushroom toxins in people's bodies, and I didn't really know much about that before this case, and the stages they go through, and just horrific. What happens to your organs and your liver, and so learning about that, and then to have that juxtaposed with, so the prosecution laid out a timeline, and I said in the podcast it reminded me of that old show 24, you know, when they have the split screen. And so the prosecution was saying, for example, so on the Sunday after the lunch, so the day after the lunch, you know, when Don Patterson was in so much pain he could barely speak, you had Erin taking her son to a flying lesson. On the Monday, Don had a tube down his throat. Erin was in an ambulance on the way to Monash Hospital, but she was calm and chatty, according to the paramedic. On the Tuesday, all 4 lunch guests were on their way to the ICU at the Austin Hospital on life support in varying stages of organ failure, but Erin Patterson was being discharged with no clinical or biochemical evidence of Amanita poisoning. So that kind of juxtaposition of the timeline, I think I've spoken to lots of people, and that really that stuck with me at the difference in the sicknesses between the lunch guests and Erin. But then, of course, the defence rebuttal to that was that Erin was sick, she just wasn't as sick as the lunch guests. And we did hear evidence from Dimitri Gerostimoulis from the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine saying that people's bodies do react differently to Amanita poisoning. You can have different grades of severity, you know, and sometimes it depends on how much you eat, how old you are, your weight, previous health conditions, things like that.
I think, yes, listening to the treatment that was given to people who were poisoned, and poisoning is horrible. And listening to that, listening to them they were put into induced comas, and the care of the physicians and the medical staff as they tried to save their lives was incredibly compelling and gut-wrenching to listen to the head of ICU talking about every effort that was made to save these people, 3 of which, as we know, died. There's been a huge amount of interest in this trial. Why do you think this case has captured so much attention?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me that question. I think it's the particular ingredients of the case, the elements of it itself, the alleged murder weapon being death cap mushrooms. I think it's because a woman is involved. These types of cases always get more attention. You know, women historically are supposed to be nurturers and carers, so when one is alleged of murder, I always find there's more attention on those particular cases.
And I think it is, as you know, you've pointed out, it's important to remember that this isn't just a story either. There are real people involved in this who are grieving still. It wasn't that long ago. We've lost 3 members of a large extended family, and that's having an impact, an ongoing impact that will be felt forever.
I think that's the reason for the interest too, because it sprung from such a mundane event, you know, a family lunch on a Saturday. And I think that's the banality of that, what should have been a wholesome family lunch to what eventuated, that's really grabbed people's interest as well. And I think just generally, Sash, you know, and lots of people ask me this on kind of legal panels that I do, it's the psychological aspect of cases like this. People are fascinated with how people tick and how they behave and why they act the way they do and how they react to things, why they react to things. And the psychological elements of that appeal to certain people. So I think that's a reason to generally for crime cases.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Ash.
Recapping our breaking news. A Supreme Court jury has found Erin Patterson guilty of murdering 3 relatives by deliberately lacing a beef Wellington lunch with death cap mushrooms. 50-year-old Erin Patterson's defence had been the poisonous mushrooms were accidentally included in the meals she served to 4 relatives in 2023. Patterson's parents-in-law, Don and Gail Patterson, both died after the lunch, along with Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, survived after spending weeks in hospital. Sitting in Morwell, the Supreme Court jury found Patterson guilty of murdering Don, Gail and Heather, and guilty of the attempted murder of Ian. And Victoria Police has acknowledged the work of its homicide detectives during its complex investigation into the deaths of Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson. In a statement, Victoria Police says, "Our thoughts are with the respective families at this time, and we acknowledge how difficult these past 2 years have been for them. We will continue to support them in every way possible following this decision." We would also like to acknowledge the work of Homicide Squad detectives over the course of this complex investigation, as well as the significant support received from a number of other areas across Victoria Police. We haven't seen Erin Patterson for the last 10 weeks, and she has not been seen walking out of court after her guilty verdict. This series of photographs of Erin Patterson were taken when she was inside the police van towards the beginning of her triple murder trial and have now been released. As we've been reporting, a Supreme Court jury found Erin Patterson guilty of murdering 3 relatives by deliberately lacing a beef Wellington lunch with death cap mushrooms. And we will continue with our coverage of the verdict and further reaction throughout the afternoon and evening here on the ABC News channel.